You guys have been asking me for a while for my Clubsport TD Plus settings. So today I'm going through those. It's going to be a little more simple than you expect. These are my settings. My settings are tremendously simple to understand. They are some settings that can be translated into other wheelbases. I've used this in other wheelbases. And the reason why I have these settings is that the force feedback in Assetto Corsa Competizione, for all is fun since the very start, it is too dampened. They want to do a steering rack simulation, and because most of these are an electronic power steering, they will have a lot of dampening through the steering, just like your real car, and it feels like always too dampened. Even with these settings in almost every wheel, it feels very, very dampened. This is not the case with other titles like Automobilista 2 or Assetto Corsa or iRacing, where you can add a little more of your own flavor to the force feedback, to have what you want in and what you want out. With Assetto Corsa Competizione, sadly, I'm finding since the very start is that everything is already so muddled. I have to remove everything that is a filter, or almost everything that is a filter, so I can have the most raw possible feeling from the force feedback, and this gives me it. Now, I'm leaving this in setup 2 because on setup 1 I have it for Assetto Corsa and something like that. It doesn't really matter. Now let's start at the beginning. The sensitivity, I'm leaving at 900 because I have found, I might be wrong, but I've never found any difference between having it at 900 or changing it in-game, or putting it at 0 and then mixing and matching with the steering wheel rate to, 450 for the S, and whatever it is, you'll have to look on the list. I find absolutely no difference in my skill level. It may be totally different for the esports guys. For me, 900 works. Next, it will be the force feedback strength. This is a 15 Newton meter wheelbase, and you can basically use even the Clubsport TD at almost 100 if you want to. I would generally go a little bit below that because, give it a little more headroom. And the force feedback strength, it really is going to depend on actually what you want. I found that 75%, which is around 11 Newton meters, has been totally fine. You need to mix and match this between the force feedback strength and then the gain that we'll look at later in the game. You can lower this and increase the gain, but then it will be a game of trying to figure out how much do I have to increase the gain until it hits the clipping. Generally, this wheelbase, even when you push it down, it will have a good headroom for not hitting the clipping. You can lower, therefore, the force feedback. Of course, the advantage of having a force feedback strength so high is that you can lower the gain a lot, but also the disadvantage is that if something goes wrong, there's some sort of bug on a force feedback, like happened, for example, on George Boothby or in the game, you can have a situation where the wheel will spin and you will not be prepared for it and you can hurt yourself. So have that in mind. This is, once again, it is totally personal, just like the rest of these settings. Now, for full force, this is totally irrelevant because full force is not in the game. They sell this as a feature, but honestly, they put like a huge banner, oh, it's full force, but there's no title there. It doesn't matter if it's iRacing, Assetto Corsa Competizione, or GT7 or whatever. Even though it's going to be eventually on Assetto Corsa Competizione, we don't have it, so totally irrelevant. Speaking of that, make sure that you change your driver. If you have driver 456, uninstall that. Put at least 455. There's a new one out, the 457, as of the moment that I'm writing this. In 457, it fixes everything that 456 had, and in terms of stability, it has been perfect for me. Still, the driver packages aren't still that good for this generation of a wheelbase. For some reason, there are still some bugs here and there. Therefore, I would urge you to test it. I have had good reactions to this one, but likely could have still some bugs. Okay, the next three will be the natural dampening and friction and inertia. As you can see, like everything else, like the spring effect and dampers, and I believe spring effect and damper effect strength aren't used in Assetto Corsa Competizione. But for the natural dampening, lateral friction, and inertia, I'm using it at 0 because, once again, Assetto Corsa Competizione is incredibly dampened on its simulation, and I just want to remove this. This might not be something for you. It is something for me, but this is a good way to start from. If it feels too raw for you, you can add a little more dampened or a little more inertia, or even a little more friction to slow down the steering wheel if you want that. But for me, it gives you a lot of information on the steering wheel and also a lot of dynamic range in the force feedback. This is especially visible at Nordschleife with all of those undulations. You can really feel the wheel dipping into certain depressions, and you can understand what the car might be want to do. Now, the interpolation filter is the amount of smoothing or the amount of filtering you're going to have from your force feedback signal. You can imagine a force feedback signal just like an audio signal, up and down, up and down, up and down, and whatever. And what the filtering does is smoothen the peaks. Essentially, that's, you can imagine how it is. If you lower the force feedback filter to 0, you're going to have a lot of crisp details, but it can feel a little bit too noisy in certain games, like for example Assetto Corsa. If you have the force feedback filtering at 0, on that game it just feels like you're driving over glass. And with Assetto Corsa Competizione, this is not the case. You can be running at 0 if you want to. Generally, I've been finding a good balance between crispness and smoothness of peaks on Interpolation 1 or 2, but I've been leaving this on 2, even for the DD1, the GTDD Pro, or the CSL-DD. And these are exactly the same settings I've been using on DD1 and works really well. You can lower this to 1 or increase it as you want it, but generally I'm finding that this is a good balance. For force feedback intensity, I'm just leaving at 100. I don't want any more muteness from the force feedback, and the force strength is also going to be 100. I just want to have a one-to-one representation of your force there. And the spring and dampening effect, I believe they are not used in Assetto Corsa Competizione, but regardless, I'm just turning it off just for the sake of it. This is the game side, and once again, it is going to be probably controversial on the way that I'm using this. And this is the same with Acetec as well. The only difference between this, what I'm going to show you on the background for Acetec, is that on the software side of Acetec, instead of using inertia at 3, I'm using inertia at 1, especially for the Ferrari. You know, inertia 1, 2, it's going to be fine right now with RaceHub 3.0. As for the force feedback, the gain is going to be set quite low. It's set at 35%. This actually gives me a good headroom for the force feedback to go over the rumbles and all of that, where you may hit clipping when you hit one, but that's totally fine. But generally, I'm finding that it's not even hitting that. You can increase the gain a little bit if you want to, gain up until 50, 55 at that force may even be good enough. But generally, I'm leaving at 35 because this will give you around, physically, maybe around 7 to 8 Newton meters force feedback. At peaks, generally, it is incredibly comfortable to drive this in long stints. Minimum force, I've never used this. I'm going to set it at 0 always. And once again, because this is Assetto Corsa Competizione, I'm leaving the damper and the dynamic damper at 0. Because, like I'm going to say again, the Assetto Corsa force feedback, Assetto Corsa Competizione force feedback is incredibly dampened. So I'll leave everything at 0. This should be... This is the way that I've been using it for a long while. The dynamic dampening even can go to like 50% and it will work, but then it becomes too dampened for me when you start adding more dampening, and I just want a more raw feeling because, once again, it just feels like there's a lot on top of it when you add dampening. For the road effect is incredibly personal. You can use this at 0, 100, whatever you want. I just want a little bit of peppering or flavor on the force feedback, and then road effect at 9% has been good enough for me. This is not by all means the only way to do this force feedback at all. You're more than welcome to share your settings no matter what is the wheelbase, and your way to do it will be totally personal. Once again, force feedback is one of the most personal things that exists. In reality, sim racing is incredibly personal in terms of what you get from the steering wheels, the pedals. People like different things. This is my technique, or rather my strategy, to tackle this specific game. In Assetto Corsa, I may have multiple settings that work. In Assetto Corsa Competizione, I've just found this one setting for me. It's the one that is working the most or the best. Once again, it's the same thing that I use for my Acetec Forte wheelbase. I've used it on a DD1. I've used it for Mazda. Let me know your experience on a force feedback. Share your settings no matter what the wheelbase is. Let's use the comment section as a way to share settings and strategies and explain why you want it that way.